Hi, I'm Alison and this is the CustomerX Files. Professionally speaking, my background is rooted in marketing, but last year I ditched the CMO career path and followed my true passion, putting the customer at the forefront of business strategy. You could say I'm all in on the overall customer experience. As I always say, we are people before we're professionals, so personally speaking, you'll often find me spending time with my teenage daughters, traveling, cooking, exploring thrift shops, or hiking on secluded trails. Tom Petty fills up much of my playlist, British programming is often on TV, and as an English major, oddly, my reading list is surprisingly short. But there's only so many hours in the day, the cats knock my book away, or the dogs are begging for me to take them for a walk. More importantly, thank you. Thank you for joining me each and every episode with my incredible guests. We're so happy to have you here and so happy to have you join the conversation. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us after our brief hiatus. I am extremely excited to jump back in and bring these podcast episodes to everyone. And we're going to kick it off with, I think, is a really exciting topic. And I'm joined today by Shannon Howard. And professionally speaking, Shannon is the Director of Customer and Content Marketing at Intellum, where she has the privilege of working with and creating for customer education professionals. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic. Shannon has served in a variety of roles in product, in marketing, and also in education. And she, like me, likes to take really complex and complicated things and simplify them and then connect people. And she really believes in a philosophy in education that's approachable and accessible and applicable. So it's not surprising that she's extremely talented at building and developing communities of practitioners who can learn and they can grow together. Shannon and I have gotten to know each other a little bit over the last couple of years. I know that personally speaking, because we are people before professionals, she and her husband, Josh, they mentor college students and have a big role and a passion in doing that, as well as volunteering in their community, and they love being outdoors and being physically active. I also happen to know, and we'll get to this in a second, thanks to LinkedIn, that Shannon, you are an ESFJ on the Myers-Briggs scale, and I kind of dork out over that. I'm an ENFJ. So I'm going to get back to that since we're separated by just one letter. But welcome. Thank you so much for carving out time to join us for today's episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very excited. Also curious to dig in. I love personality assessments like that.
Yeah, so I always ask everyone an icebreaker question, and I didn't even give this to you ahead of time, but it has to do with that Myers-Briggs. So an ESFJ, and like I said, because I'm an ENFJ, I had to go double check since it's been a while. But it's extroverted, observant, feeling, and judging. Those are what the ESFJ letters stand for. And then I read the description, attentive and people-focused, and enjoy taking part in their social community, and achievements are guided by decisive values, and you willingly offer guidance to others. And if that doesn't describe you, I really don't know what does, because it was pretty much like, yep, we just bottled up Shannon and wrote a description. So tell me, since you dork out about this like me, ESFJ, what has that meant in your personal life, in your professional life, and how do you see that reflected?
Sure. So fun fact, when I was younger, I tested as ENFJ. So I think in my mind, I was always ENFJ. And then I had tested again maybe 2 years ago and got ESFJ, which makes a lot of sense. So I'm a big fan of Strengths Finders. And I think it aligns really well with my StrengthsFinder strengths too, around development and communication, positivity, connectedness. That's a big one for me, is just seeing all the connections between people and things. And so, I don't know, I think I see this show up. I'm a very people-oriented person. It's part of why I love community building, customer marketing, even content marketing, because I get the opportunity to partner with people on content and bringing their ideas into the market. I think it's interesting. It says here, their achievements are guided by decisive values, because I was just talking to a student this morning that said, my feelings about things don't matter because I'll make decisions based on my values. Like, even if I'm frustrated, by a person or a situation, what I do will not come from that frustration, but it's going to come from my value for community and people and making sure like I'm being empathetic and compassionate over just like reacting from a place of emotion. So I thought that was interesting.
And that's very mature thinking. I mean, I don't know how old the student, I think you work with older students, but still to be able to, I like that. I wish more people thought that way and kind of brought their personal values into the workplace. I mean, you know that that's important to me. And maybe I should redo Myers-Briggs because maybe it's been a while. So ENFJ, and we do evolve. So maybe we'll have to, I don't know, maybe I'll toss a link to the Myers-Briggs on this episode and everyone can go out and jump in and see what they actually are now and if it's changed over the course of their career.
I just think they're fun. And the reason I say StrengthsFinders specifically was reframing personality tests or behavioral assessments to think less of, putting me in a box or saying this is what you're good at, which means that these other things maybe you're not as good at, but really thinking how can I lean into those gifts and strengths and how I'm naturally wired to work to be successful. And that's the thing, like just connecting with people online. It's something that comes very naturally to me and I love to do it. Other people, that's not the case. They don't want to be in online communities. They don't want to be active on LinkedIn, but that's fine because like the work that they do is more aligned to how they are wired to work and their gifts and talents.
I love that. And it goes back to, you talk about a student in school and I have 2 daughters and we naturally kind of gravitate towards, oh, you're getting an A in English and a C in science. We better quickly go focus on the C that you're, getting in science where it's like, wait a second. What about we focus on the A and really, nurture those skills and talents? And I think it's a nice segue into talking about goals. How do we set goals for ourselves? Should we really focus on the thing that, let's face it, if you're not a science and math person, you're probably not going to be a science and math person. So wouldn't it be better to focus on goals? And we're going to talk professionally, obviously, today about goals in our careers, but I think personally as well, it makes goal setting a lot more fun and a lot more attainable.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
To set goals personally and professionally that make sense for you, right? And to really think, why is it that I want to do these things? Or why is it that this is my goal? Is it because it's actually something I want to achieve or because I think I'm supposed to want to achieve that?
Yes. And so when we talk about goals in a professional setting, I think sometimes we lose sight of that because we think about, okay, I've got to support the corporate goals and I've got to, here I go, here are my marching orders. But you and I think very similarly in that, no, the goals need to support the business, but you need to be a part of those goals as well. So let's just start very simply. What's the big deal? Why has this become such a hot topic of conversation, in your opinion?
Hot topic for a few reasons. I think one is most people are not clear on what their goals are. And that's when you see people grasping at straws and taking on way too much is because they don't have clearly defined goals. So they're doing anything and everything they can find to do to provide value to their organization. Because in the absence of clear goals and clear performance measures, we just throw everything we can at the wall. I think the other thing is in our current market, it's been so unstable that people are finding a way to prove their value. And so they want goals that tie to business metrics. That's also just what we're hearing online, right? Every webinar, blog post, LinkedIn post is talking about tying your personal metrics or team metrics to company metrics, which is a best practice. And as I know we'll talk about, it's not always necessary to directly, and it's not even always possible to directly tie something to revenue.
Right. And the key there being revenue, right? They don't all have to roll up to money and dollars. There are other things. It's definitely a North Star, of course, for businesses, but there's other ways to align. And so that's the next thing that I wanted to talk about is alignment, because that has been, if you can't find a blog or a webinar that talks about goals and not talk about that alignment. and why it's so critical to make sure that we're aligning the goals to company goals. Talk a little bit about that, and why is that so important, and why is it more than just a buzz term?
Mm-hmm. So goal alignment, I'll again kind of put it into different buckets. One is aligning with company goals. And the reason for that is the work that we're doing should ultimately line up to those North Star goals and what our company has said is important. So sometimes there are things that may seem interesting or fun or important to you as an individual and a professional that just aren't relevant to where the company is at today. And if that's the case, we got to pull back our personal preference and focus on what matters most to the business in today's, state, and be willing to put other things off to the side. I think also aligning goals, company goals, makes it so you can align goals across teams, because what we typically find is almost this like down-up approach where people are creating their individual and team goals without thinking about those company goals, maybe because their company hasn't established them or communicated them, maybe because it's just not been a practice. But then you end up with the marketing team with these goals, customer success with these goals, sales with these goals, support with these goals, product with these goals. And what we find is they all compete with each other, So product has a goal to move the needle on product adoption, or customer success has a goal around retention and expansion, and support has a goal around response time and customer satisfaction scores. And they're all interdependent, but those dependencies have not always been laid out because we don't share that goal, right? So if you need another team to support you in achieving a goal, you need to actually line up those goals. Yeah, so I think alignment is important, but can be difficult depending on how your organization sets goals and communicates them.
Yeah, and you called out the up and down, right? And I think that we've, not all, but we're getting better at that. Where, first you have to have an organization that actually sets goals and communicates the goals. I'm not so naive to think that every single person listening has that. And I think, chances are, but it's also okay to ask. It's actually something that you should ask if you don't know. Just simply say, well, I want to make sure I'm supporting the business. So could I please have visibility into what are those goals that the executives sit around the table and they come up with? It's a lot easier to find that if you're, say, a publicly, traded company or something like that. If you're private or if you're smaller, maybe not. And then of course, I'm a visual learner, as I always say. So I picture the up and down arrows, right? And then we filter out like, okay, well, I'm in customer success. So I know that I want to help support the revenue goal. My part in that is retention. Here's, a measurable and specific goal. But to your point, those lines have to then also go back and forth. And I think that's sort of the next phase. And I haven't seen a lot of that. But for that same goal, right, of retention, now I sit in a exclusively CX focused role. I have a big part of that, and I better be supporting that through customer engagement activities and things like that. Let's make sure we're not reinventing the wheel. And if we can collaborate, that we're getting that done. So the arrows go, all different directions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess, up and down and then laterally too.
Yes. And what have you seen, Shannon? So if we actually do this and we align our goals, what happens? Why? How do we get rewarded for putting in that effort?
So, what is it called? There's a book called Swing and a movie that just came out called Boys in the Boat. And it's about a rowing team. And it basically, very long analogy to talk about just rowing in the same direction, which maybe we've heard this term in our companies before. A lot of companies, people are not rowing in the same direction. So if you put all these people in a boat, some are going right, left, forward, back, like you're just spinning in a circle and certainly not getting to the end of the race and definitely not in first place. And that should be our goal, right? Is to get to the end of the race in place. That's our goal in our company. So I think you end up having less people kind of spinning in a circle, not going anywhere, because you have this goal alignment, you have this focus, but you also have just better collaboration, probably improved camaraderie between teams, because when you have competing goals and priorities is really frustrating, because it feels like someone is actively keeping you from your goal when the reality is you have not been aligned on goals. And then it also helps us to prioritize what matters most. So 1, we don't burn out. And then 2, we can actually say to the business, you set these goals. Here's how I was contributing to those goals. And then here's the impact that I made. And that's good for our job security, but also for our resume and our portfolio to be able to say that these are the results that we drove.
Yep. And I think if, to your point, if we're doing the arrows going horizontally as well as vertically, and I know you've mentioned, we've all heard the term like, CYA, we want to make sure that, okay, we do the goals so that we have these and we have benchmarks. Like, let's push it a little bit further than that, instead of it just, because that's more of that, like, all for myself kind of thing, all for me, and we're not necessarily collaborating. So don't just go into protection mode, but let's go into collaboration mode. And then y'all have skin in the game, which I think is, like you said, the economy, everything that has happened in the last year, it's easy to fall into that. But we actually do come out ahead if we decide to go the other direction.
Yeah, that's even from a growing in the business perspective. As you grow, and as you know, Alison, the higher up you go, the more you're thinking about the business is your team, right? And how do I do what's in the best interest of the business, which might mean that I don't get budget or I get head count because it actually matters most somewhere else. And how do I, how do I personally contribute? How does my team contribute? Rather than how do we get all of our objectives done so we can say that we did a great job, even if it's at the expense of another team, which isn't actually in the best interest of the business as a whole.
Yep. And I think it's important too for, just recently we were having this conversation and we're sitting, I'm very fortunate, I sit on that team now. And of course I eat, sleep, breathe those goals, those revenue numbers and things like that. They are very top of mind for me, but I'm not that far removed that I don't remember what it's like to have 5,000 things going on and not enough people. And I'm just trying to get things done. So I think executive teams need to really make a cognizant effort of not only creating the goals and sharing the goals, but doing it with a cadence so that it's not, hey, it's January, here you go, here are the goals. And then we don't hear about them again until December when we didn't hit them. Sure. That's not doing anyone any favors. And it's also not making any connections. As a manager, an individual contributor, I want to be reminded, what are the goals and what am I working towards? And then I think also the leadership team needs to show progress on the goals. No matter what, there needs to be, here's where we are. We're crushing it here, but we're not so much here. How can we come together to support it? So I think there's as much on the executive team and the leadership team to make sure that the company feels connected and motivated. And that means there has to be transparency and a cadence of communication. So we need to do that and take that upon ourselves.
Yes, totally agree. I love that you're doing that.
And what about, okay, so let's say we're doing those things and we have goals. How do we make those connections? I was just sort of talking about that. How do we analyze the company goals and then actually have them make sense to our own roles and understand how we can contribute and support them?
So first, you have to know your company goals. So like you said earlier, if you don't know them, ask about them. And they usually fall into 3 buckets: revenue, retention, and then odd man out. It's employee NPS or customer NPS or something, startup, some type of initiative. So that one kind of, who knows, depends on the company and their
wild card.
Yeah, for the year. And then from there, I think you ask yourself, how might your work impact those goals? So I wrote down an example. If you're in customer marketing, your work might be able to influence all 3, right? Because if you are engaged customers are probably likely to be happier, rate your company more positively. This is thinking about our product as a whole product solution, where it's not just the product that we sell, but the engagement, the communications, how it is to work with our company, the different teams and people that support the customer. If you are creating voice of customer content, so if you have reviews, case studies, videos, things like that, references, that's all in support of revenue. You can track, how many of our close one deals had a reference attached, how many of our opportunities were impacted by case studies, how many pieces of voice of customer content did a prospect consume in the sales process, how much more likely are they to convert over time, which takes time to measure and it can be difficult to track, but that's where you can start to, think in that direction and also paint the picture in that direction of showing people it's not just about the creation of these things or having these things available, but we can actually start to track and measure the impact of voice and customer content. And then for retention, if you have a customer community or you have even like a great onboarding nurture, like if you can help set customers up to be successful, then that can impact retention as well. And so those numbers can take longer to measure, but then you can even break them down. Well, and I like to think of this as like a hypothesis. If someone does this, then we expect that to happen. And then you can actually measure that. Well, if this happens, does that other thing actually happen?
I agree with everything you said. And I think it's also, don't be shy about just laundry list it. Take those goals, because you pointed out there's not that many of them typically. There shouldn't be anyway. There should be 3, maybe 4 that are sort of the guiding principles or the goals for the organization for the year. Okay, well, look at those, and they are usually the buckets that you mentioned, and just start jotting down what is everything I do day to day that could potentially support that. It's a really fun exercise because one, it really shows, wow, I get a lot done in a day. And then you can kind of pick out, all right, well, what of that do I feel like I really enjoy? Where am I crushing it? What do we need? And that gives you a little autonomy and a little bit of control when you start thinking about, the goals. And we actually now, and we have a CX goal that's not, that shouldn't be that shocking. I've stepped in and I've kind of said, no, we really do have to have something. And to your point, you may not think of it right away, but I will bet you $1 million, you support a CX goal, you support a revenue goal, and you just have to kind of start documenting it to go from point A to point B. So it's a very worthwhile exercise. But what about, okay, so this is great, and we figured out, okay, I do these 29 things, and then I'm going to craft some goals. What if you're dictated a goal? And I think everyone listening is probably like, yep, your boss gave you a goal, and it's actually not tied to the outcomes. How do you handle that situation?
That definitely happens more than we want for it to. I would say 2 things. Why I like 2-part answers? I don't know. One is most managers are not dictating to you your goals. They're a first draft. They're kind of their first attempt at what they think that your goals should be. And especially if your manager is over kind of multiple different things or has never done your job before, they need you as kind of the subject matter expert to help them further refine that goal. So there probably is some room for healthy pushback and further definition. I would encourage people to actually do that homework, not say to your boss, I need a goal that's tied to business outcomes. Try again. But to actually do your homework. How might these case studies drive revenue? Or how might this program impact retention? And then go back and present that to your boss as an option. The other one is I personally don't think that everything has to tie to those goals, right? Some things are just business as usual. You do them because it's a company value. So I remember one time a CMO asked me to take on a project, and I said to her, is this something that you want me to MVP and figure out if it's worth doing and kind of test it out? Or do you fundamentally believe that we need to be doing this as a thought leader in the space? Because it's 2 different approaches. And she said, I fundamentally believe that we should be doing this. And so the metric initially was get this thing off the ground, and then we would kind of build on it from there. So sometimes you can ask, and it just is someone thinks this has to be done. We need to have XYZ thing. And that can be the metric as well, right? Because leadership has now decided that that is a business initiative, that it's a priority. And so that could be a goal as well.
I love that. Everything you said, just to kind of recap, one, come prepared to the discussion about your goals. As a leader, like, I don't want to dictate them. I don't want to dictate the goals. Your manager doesn't really want to either. And if you come and you do your homework, chances are you definitely get a say in how those goals, maybe not what they are, but you definitely will have a say in what the metric is, like how you're going to be measured for it. And that should be a conversation, right? It's not just a dictation of what you have to do. I love that. And I love that you called that out, and just to have the confidence to have that conversation. And honestly, you look like you got your stuff together. You come to the table. I mean, this is nothing new. We do like a self, evaluation, and then we get to have our feedback from our managers, and then goals are going to be the natural next step. So just come on in and come prepared. And if you have ones from the year before, I like to use those and say, well, this worked. This wasn't so great. I think we should focus on this. You have known many times I've come in and I've basically written them, and it's like, yep, maybe there's a few changes, but I would much rather be in the driver's seat for what I'm going to have to execute on. Sure. So I love that you bring that up.
Manager probably appreciates the support, right? I think we've kind of lost this idea earlier in my career. I think a lot of the narrative was find ways that you can take things off your boss's plate, the ways that you can support them, and to start to level up your thinking and your work. I don't think we talk about that quite so much anymore, but it's the same concept of people are busy. They got a lot of things on their plate. They're making decisions. The higher up,
absolutely,
more meetings you have, just to help them out a little bit. Take your own, first stab at what your metric should be.
Yep, 100%. And you, this is actually how we decided to talk about this topic, because you recently did a blog, and you were talking about goals, and you mentioned vision. And I think that is really critical. And I want you to just sort of talk about what you meant by having the vision for your program in mind when you're doing your goal setting exercise.
Okay, so the way I think about this is my vision is the big picture future state of whatever it is that I'm working on. So, I think the first time I started doing this was we were building a learning management product, building a customer education program. And when we were building, it was really important for us to think about what is the future state of this? Which audiences are we going to educate? In today's world, it's customers, prospects, and partners. Is there a future state of this? Are there other audiences that we're going to educate? Because we need to factor that into how we build this thing. And so it was thinking, not like you have to set that in stone and say, absolutely, 3 years from now, I know that this is what I want to do, but you want to have a vision for what could be. And so I start with this like kind of 3 to 5 year vision. Here's where I would ultimately like customer marketing to end up. Here's what I'd ultimately like content marketing to look like. And then backtrack from there. Okay, well, what would I do this year to start working toward that vision? So the vision helps you to not box out things for your future, right? Because if you set things up for today's state, but you're not looking down the road, you can be handicapped by how your system is set up, or the resources that are put into it, or platforms that you choose to invest in. But then from a goal perspective, you're also just kind of chunking it down. So if I think about, okay, big picture, let's say I want to run a marathon. Well, I'm not running a marathon this year, so maybe it's going to take you some time, and it probably depends on whether you've been running already or not. But maybe you set a goal like in chunks. You want to do a 5K, and then you want to do a 10K, and then you want to do a half, and then you want to work your way up to a marathon. So that bigger goal, objective, vision then helps you to work backwards to what goals do I need to achieve in the near term, in the intermediate term, to ultimately end up in my final destination.
That's a great I love analogies that help me just, understand. And that's a really good one and very true. And I think that another thing that we need to keep in mind is even though with our goals, we are tactically supporting the company goals, it doesn't mean that we can't be strategic for our own program, our own world, and what we're working on. And I think that, one of the things in Boston this fall, when Bianca and I presented together and we talked a little bit about goals and crafting goals, we had surveyed the community, and I was really bummed to see how few people had a professional development goal on their list. And this kind of goes together as well. A vision for your program, a vision for yourself, a vision for your role and where you want to be, and then work that in. And again, back to what we were saying, if you come prepared to have the discussion about your goals and it's already in there, man, that makes it a lot easier to just say, this is what I want. And then you can negotiate from there. So I love that. And I won't be running a marathon ever. So I like the analogy, but
I'm in that boat. I did a half last year and I'm just not interested in more.
I know you did. And I did couch to 5K a few years ago because I played basketball. And so it's not that I don't have any athletic ability, but running is just like not my thing. And I did it to say that I did it. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm going to love it. I didn't love it. But it's okay. Sometimes knowing what you don't love is just as important as knowing what you do love. So I want to pivot for just a second and talk about gap analysis. And you and I had chatted a little bit before, we hopped on the show today, but I'm curious what you kind of think about that and analyzing goals and then kind of identifying gaps along the way. Is it something you do? Is it something you believe in? What are your thoughts?
My thought is that your perspective on this is probably a lot better than mine, because I think I've already kind of shared around. I don't think that everything has to tie to a goal, right? Another example would be a data hygiene project. Very passionate about these. I don't think that you can do truly great work without clean data, but is that a company initiative or priority? Not usually. Can you directly tie it to revenue? Good luck, but it's still worth doing. But I think at the end of the day, for each of us, it's really, and I have to do this because I'm a very multi-passionate, very easily excited person who wants to do it all. And I have to ask, is this actually valuable? Is this actually valuable? Can I prove that there is some measurable value to the business if I work on this? Or am I doing it because it's easier to do than the things that actually move the needle, or because it's fun for me, which is fine, but then you also still need to get those measurable, impactful things done as well. But I'd be curious how you've approached gap analysis.
I think in order to do gap analysis, it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the call, the vertical and the horizontal. And I've gotten really excited about gap analysis because of everything that I've been doing around customer journey and mapping out what that looks like. And part of that is gap analysis. If you actually look at the journey and then you look at how are the different teams and departments supporting that journey, and are you delivering a consistently positive customer experience? And I think that's what we were getting at with the goals. So you did comment on it about the horizontal motion of if I have these goals and the product team has these goals, and then the sales and the customer success team are doing this, and they all think they're aligning, but are they? And I think the gap, that I'm using the term gap to kind of mean where are there opportunities for collaboration? Because if there's low-hanging fruit and you're not taking advantage of it, that's a gap. And you have to look at that, right? Why should every team be writing customer emails?
No.
When one, that's not delivering. I know. I picked that on purpose because I have you here. So I knew I would get you talking about it in one way or another, but no. And should you all be communicating at the same time to the customers? No. And are we able to either, can we have multifaceted communication? Can we have a couple of things in one communication? Those are those are gaps, right? But everyone might have a content goal. And that's not good. I mean, yay, I'm glad you're supporting, content, but are you doing it in the right way? Are you doing it for the right reasons? How is it impacting the customer? And how is it impacting your colleagues at the same time? So that's where this whole gap thing kind of comes in for me, like the goal gap. So that's what I mean by that. And I think it's important.
I think it is important, and it's probably, unless your company has a CX function, it's probably missed. So once upon a time, a director of product management told me, Shannon, where you really have to be mindful is where your product ends and someone else's begins. Because my product is my focus, their product is their focus, but the line between the two, whether that's the navigation, the app as a whole, or even just like the user journey aspect of it, that's the part that no one's paying attention to, is where one thing ends and the next one begins, and that's where people are going to get lost. And I think that's where, when you do customer journey mapping, you start to see, oh, you send that email too? Oh, I thought I was doing that. Or, wow, we completely left people hanging. I had someone reach out to me yesterday who said, my company completely leaves people hanging between contract close and implementation. And I got to find a way to solve that. So I think it happens, but it tends to be ad hoc or one very customer-focused team member, usually customer marketing or CX.
Fun fact, how did I end up where I am and make the decision that CX is where I wanted to focus? Because I was that person. And I'm so passionate about that journey and that experience that it's exactly what I was doing. I was starting to pull it apart and look at it, and I realized we just need to do more of it. But a single person can do it. So for people who are listening, hey, if you want to elevate, your game a little bit and you want to find some of those gaps, it can serve you well. We'll leave it at that. It's a good tool to have in the toolbox. And in addition to that, we've sort of touched on this, and Shannon, you talked about prioritization just a bit ago. And one of my favorite things about goals, and why do we need them? We talked about that at the very beginning of the conversation. I personally like that they give me pushback power because it's documented. And then when somebody says, well, could you just, that's my favorite. Could you just do this? So I'd love to hear your thoughts. How are goals helpful with prioritization?
Definitely what you just said, with goals give you pushback power, because you can say, is this new project, request, initiative going to help me meet these goals? And if not, then it's not a priority. Okay, so goals give you pushback power. If someone asks you for a new project, request, initiative, you can ask, is this directly tied to my goals? And if you can't prove how it ties to your goals, it's not a priority. And so that gives you some pushback power. Now, maybe it does help you contribute to your goals, in which case you can ask, is this new request going to make a bigger impact on that goal than what I currently have planned? In which case you can swap. But if not, again, you can kind of push back and defer. Or you could even say, would taking on this new thing cause me to create poorer results in what I've already committed to, right? Because that's the other thing. The more we take on, the more we lessen the results of our current programs, because we're not able to invest full capacity into them.
I think that's a good point. You're watering it down. If you take on too much, you're either going to, what is it? Like, I can do 3 things really, really well. I could do 10 things not so well. And I still, to this day, print my goals. They're literally, I can't move my camera, but they're on my little magnet board over there. And I do look at them from time to time when something comes in. I was like, okay, first question, can I bucket it? Like you said, would it support? Because if it does, then look at me. That's a great thing that I can do. And if not, I immediately can go back, or I can talk to my manager and say, hey, this came in, it's not supporting it. So either we have to drop something, or I say no, one or the other. And those conversations can definitely be productive. And certainly, being disciplined in this is tough. Goal setting is difficult enough. Actually being disciplined to do all the things that you and I are talking about is even harder. Like, where have you found success in doing this? Or maybe where have you learned from not being as disciplined? Share, please, with us what's worked, what's not.
So I would say definitely not the most disciplined person. So I mentioned very easily excited, very eager to take on and try new things. And I'm definitely in a phase of my life where I'm pausing, taking on new things, and just getting my feet back under me and trying to do what I'm currently doing well. When it comes to staying focused on goals and priority, I like how you're printing it and putting it behind your computer. I just made a note to do that because I've thought about that before. But I know that I thrive on public accountability. Like, I want you to hold my feet to the fire in front of other people because I will get it done before the meeting. I will make sure that my metrics are on track because I want to have a good progress report when I go into that meeting, or I at least want to be able to say, hey, we didn't see the number that we wanted. Here's why, and here's what we're going to do to fix it. Like, I want to be proactive about that. And so earlier you were talking about executive leaders having a cadence to not just share out one time what the goals are, but actually track company progress. And that's what we do on our marketing team is every 2 weeks when we have a marketing meeting, we're pulling up our scorecard and saying, okay, these are the goals that we committed to for the company in each part of the marketing team. Are we on track? Do we need to kind of push up the throttle? Are we at risk for some reason? And so there's this public accountability to actually keep track of our metrics, not lose sight of them, and then stay focused on the things that matter most, which has meant some things that we wanted to work on, we're going to put off to the side. So that
with authority. I love it.
Oh, yeah, I totally smacked my desk. I was like, woo, okay. Yeah, but actually being able to stay focused on the things that matter most instead of doing what I think we're all a little naturally inclined to do, which is, I think I can just help you with that, or that might be doable.
I like your honesty and transparency with that because it's not always easy, but that accountability piece I think is huge. And maybe just taking that a step, figure out whatever your thing is that makes you feel accountable. Like you said, maybe it's, hey, I have to present this every 2 weeks, which means I want to do well. I want to support my colleagues. And also I don't want to look like I messed up. And that's like fear of failure is real. And if that helps work with accountability, I'm all for it because it certainly motivates me. And maybe there's something else that, for you, but find your thing that will make sure that you're accountable. I think that's great advice, which you can't use for the last question. So you just gave a whole bunch of great advice, but now I'm going to ask you one more question because I ask everybody. It's been a weird 18 months, but there's a lot of new faces. This role in this industry is ever changing. So what is the piece of advice that you would give to CM, CMA, CX, whatever term you want to use, professionals today that you wish you had 5-10 years ago?
The first thing that came to mind, because there's a lot, right? You're in a highly cross-functional role. This industry is kind of pretty new, or this role is kind of pretty new, is advocate for yourself. I think a lot of us who focus on customer experience, customer marketing type roles, we just get it, right? Get it. We understand why it's so important, why we need to build relationships with our customers, especially at scale, why we need to highlight their voices. Other people don't always get that. And I know I've come into customer marketing roles and immediately in my first few weeks interviewed leadership to say, okay, help me understand, what does customer marketing mean to you? Because just because I have an idea of it, because I do this job, doesn't mean we're all on the same page. For some people, if you just have a case study, awesome, you have done customer marketing. And some people, it's customer account-based marketing, which is a little different. And some people think it's community or customer advisory boards, and it can be any and all of that. But actually advocating for yourself, for your programs, talking about it. I totally bragged on myself today because we just closed a deal that was tied to engagements that I had with someone in community. And I said, like, this person straight up said this to the sales team on their call. And I just want to point it out because it's so easy to miss the value of those interactions. And we don't, because you don't see it right away, right? But I want people to see that and hear from me over time. Hey, this is how this went. Hey, we just had our first customer office hours program. Here's how it went. Here's the feedback that we got. I want people to see the momentum, feel the momentum, because people want to be on a winning team. And that's what I tell people. You need to make customer marketing look like a winning team because our metrics can take so long to prove that you need to be at the front, advocating for yourself, which doesn't always look like bragging, but just hyping up the things that you're doing and finding other people internally who will hype them up with and for you. That's huge because perception really matters in the workplace. And we want to make sure that we look like we're on it and our programs are awesome and people and customers love us.
Absolutely. That was like 12 pieces of great advice. And like back to accountability before I asked you this last question, celebrate yourself, be confident, find your internal champions, all of those things come together. It's the narrative as well as the numbers. That's one that I like to toss, it's those two things that are really powerful. So tremendous. That's great advice. And thank you. And for those of you who are listening, if you do not follow Shannon on LinkedIn, follow Shannon on LinkedIn because you have blogs that you put out on goals and a whole bunch of other topics. And you and I are content dorks at heart. So there's usually some good stuff and maybe even a little bit of potty humor. I had to say it that I had to. So now people will go look and go find what we're referring to. But thank you so much, Shannon, for joining me and helping me kind of get this podcast back off the ground from its hiatus. And I'm sure everyone's going to find a lot of nuggets, pearls of wisdom in here. So thank you.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks for inviting me.
And for everyone else, we will see you next time on the next episode. Until then, take care and keep advocating for yourself and your programs. Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to bookmark it wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow me, Alison Bukowski, on LinkedIn. And a special thank you to Point of Reference for supporting this podcast. For over 20 years, Point of Reference has been the Salesforce native solution to solve a myriad of customer advocacy and reference management challenges. It's our goal to elevate the professionals within this space to achieve business goals and drive their programs forward as vital to business success. Contact me to learn more.